Teach your mind to understand your spirit. Teach your mind to understand your spirit. Now, I want to start off with a question. Of course, I'm not going to actually ask everybody to answer, but I want you to think about something. When a child is born, obviously the child has a body that is undeveloped, right? We look at that child as being new. We look at that baby and we say, that's a new creation, right? So obviously the body is undeveloped, and so is the mind. But what about the spirit? Is the spirit new? Let's say when Joshua was born, right? Obviously I'm talking about Andres's baby, right? That was a new body, a new mind, but was the spirit new? No, right? We know this. We know the answer to this already. But oftentimes we're going to say, well, this spirit must be new. So we think that we could mold the spirit. We think that we could transform the spirit, that we could make the spirit produce what we want it to produce. We think that if we feed the spirit something, we're going to make it become something that maybe it isn't yet. Like we could with the body, like we could with the mind. Because we can mold the mind, and we can mold the body. And we think that we could do the same thing with the spirit. The thing is, the spirit is not new. The spirit is not a day old when the baby is born, right? They start to count on the life of that human being. They start saying, this is the day that this child was born, and so this is day one. It is new. It's not old. The flesh did not pre-exist. The spirit, on the other hand, is different. The spirit existed. But the thing is that the mind and the body, because it is undeveloped, does not yet understand what the spirit contains. It does not. It does not know how to process the spirit. The mind is undeveloped, but the spirit is mature. The spirit existed from before that body ever was even considered to be a creation. The spirit already existed. So, listen, today's message can definitely change your life if you allow your mind to be open to what the Word is going to tell you today. Because it's going to sound a little absurd. It's going to sound like something that's a little bit strange. Because we're going to say, you're trying to say that the spirit can't be transformed or can't be made mature. The spirit is not to say that it is ageless, because it is not alpha and omega, right? It is not beginning and end. Our spirit does have a beginning, right? Because it is not in the same way as God, right? Our spirit does have a point to when it was created. But it was not created the moment that the body or that child was born. That spirit is not day one for that spirit. The spirit pre-existed. The spirit pre-existed. And the spirit comes with pre-programmed fruits that it is intended to produce. And that can never be changed. The things that the spirit is intended to produce, regardless of what you do to that body, that spirit will always produce what it is intended to produce. And this is why I said it's going to sound a little bit strange. And that's why this message is called Teach Your Mind to Understand Your Spirit. Teach your mind to understand your spirit. I want to give you an example. Let's say I have an apple seed. It's very tiny, very small, right? It's something that's, some people may spit it out, they throw it away, but guess what? Inside of that little seed, there is an apple tree, right? And you can see the seed, but can you see the apples? You cannot see the apples, right? You cannot see the apples. The seed is your mind. And the apples that you cannot see in it is the spirit. And in order for that seed to bear its fruit, for the apples to be manifest, you got to take that seed, you got to plant it in the earth, in the dirt, right? Let's call that dirt your body, okay? So now you have your body, you have your mind, and you have your spirit, okay? So you plant that seed in the dirt, and of course, if it's intended, not all seeds bear fruit, they don't all grow, but let's say that this particular seed happened to sprout, and it begins to grow. It is not yet ready to manifest the apples, not yet, but it is an apple tree, because that was an apple seed. And there's only one possible thing that that seed can produce, and that is apples. So it grows, and it grows, and it grows, and it grows, and eventually has branches, it has leaves, and eventually you're going to see what was in that seed the whole time, before it was planted in the ground. It always had apples, you just couldn't see it. It took some development of the seed. It needed to grow. It needed to be strong. And then in time, you get to enjoy the apples. The earth is our body. The seed is our mind. And the fruits, the apples, is our spirit. Now, what would happen if we don't try to straighten out the tree as it's growing? Let's say we don't try to guide it. We don't try to show it the proper way to grow. We would say, I'm going to plant this seed in the ground, and hey, it's an apple tree. No matter what, it's predestined to bear the fruit of apples. So if I just put it in the ground, on its own, it's going to produce apples. Yes, but let's say you don't guide it to be straight. There's a very good chance that that tree, that apple tree, regardless, it is an apple tree, will be crooked. It won't grow straight, but it will bear apples. What if we don't prune the tree? What if it's never trimmed? What if it's never maintained? It'll still bear fruit. It'll still give apples, but it won't produce as many, or maybe the quality of fruit, that it could if it were maintained, if it were developed properly, right? And let's say we don't protect that tree. Let's say we let all sorts of insects that are bad for the tree just live on there. All the bugs that want to come along and eat the fruit and do whatever they want to it. It'll still produce apples, but the fruits may not be edible. I hope you're following what I'm saying here. Your mind is responsible for the fruit that your spirit is intended to produce. But if you don't take care of your mind, what's going to happen? Oh, but I'm still going to produce the things that I'm predestined to produce. But how good is it? Are you straight? Are you healthy? Are you producing the way that you were intended to produce? And I'm not talking about producing that God created us simply just to produce. I'm talking about our spirit has something that it is predetermined. In pre-existence, something was programmed into that spirit that it was required to produce when it was put into that mind, into that body. It was predetermined, right? Much like that seed. And I hope you're following along. So remember this, your mind is responsible for the way your spirit will produce the predetermined fruits. In the book of Matthew chapter 26, verse 41, it says, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. The spirit is always going to want to produce what it is supposed to produce. It is always going to want to. But the thing is, our mind always doesn't let it produce it, right? Our mind gets in the way. The flesh, right, which really is not just, it's not this body, it is our mind which controls the body, which gets in the way of our spirit producing the fruit that it is supposed to produce. Amen? And then in the book of Romans chapter 12 verse 2 it says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It doesn't say by the renewing of your spirit. It doesn't say you need a spirit transplant. It doesn't say that you need to transform your spirit. It says transform the way that you think. Transform your mind and your life will change. But we oftentimes will say, no, I need to transform my spirit. Your spirit is always going to produce the fruits that it is intended to produce. You can't change it. Look, listen, I could take that same apple seed and I could plant it in the ground, and then I spend 30 days and 30 nights praying over it, fasting, calling upon the name of God, and asking God for that apple seed to produce peaches. Do you think that it will produce peaches? No, it will not. Because it is an apple seed. You could pray, you could fast, you could memorize the Bible, you could have every single Christian album that has ever come out, you could read hundreds of books. Your spirit will always produce what it is intended to produce. Always. It doesn't matter. It's always going to have what it was pre-programmed to have. And we can't change it. The spirit can. The mind, on the other hand, has something different. The mind could be molded. The mind could be taught. The mind could be disciplined. So same thing with the body and the flesh. We could make it look a different way. Nonetheless, the spirit is always going to produce the same thing. It will. It will always will. I could take that same apple seed and say, I know how to make it produce peaches. I'm going to plant it next to other peach trees. So I'm going to take the apple seed, I'm going to plant it amongst other peach trees. Now it's going to bear me peaches. No, guess what? You plant it among the peaches, the apple seed is still going to produce an apple tree that will in time produce apples. Your spirit is pre-programmed. Your spirit is that which you cannot see inside of that seed, but nonetheless, it has something that is predetermined to produce. Predetermined. So you cannot change it. So if you're fasting for that change in your spirit, I'm sorry, you're going to keep on fasting and you're not going to see any change unless it comes from the renewing of your mind. There is this saying, a funny southern proverb that says you could cut the ears off of a mule, that doesn't make it a horse. So it doesn't matter, right? On the outside, we may say, I'm going to change things in the appearance. At the end of the day, it doesn't change what you're supposed to produce. It doesn't change what your spirit is. So you could cut the ears off of a mule. It is never going to be a horse. You could call it a stallion, and it is not. It is a mule. It is a mule. That is what it was born to be. That is what it is. So what we need to do, we need to stop trying to change our spirit. So let me take it to another level here. Who am I talking to right now? Am I talking to your spirit or am I talking to your mind? Am I teaching your spirit or am I teaching your mind? Guess what? Your spirit understands what I'm saying. In some cases here, there's a bit of a language barrier. Guess what? Your spirit could still understand what I'm saying, regardless of the language. Because the spirit doesn't speak a language. It speaks spirit. It speaks those invisible things. And so who are we teaching here? The spirit or the mind? The mind. Because the spirit knows. The spirit knows that what I'm saying is true, but the mind judges it. The mind tries to find fault. The mind tries to say, you know what, now that I think about it, it does kind of sound true, but at the same time, I've heard something else in the past. It goes against what I believe. It goes against what I've read in the Bible. It goes against the philosophy and the doctrines that I've known for so many years. And so it is your mind that needs to be taught. I don't need to teach your spirit. Your spirit is predetermined. It is coded to be a certain way, produce a certain fruit. So no matter what, it's going to bear the same fruit. But what I need to do is teach your mind to understand your spirit. And this is where it's very difficult, because a lot of times people say, oh no, it's because speak to me in a spiritual way so that my spirit can grow. Your spirit is already mature. The thing is, your mind doesn't know how to handle it. It doesn't know how to process it. It doesn't know how to extract the things that the spirit already contains. The limitation is not in the spirit. The limitation is in the mind. And so as I stand up here today, I'm not talking to your spirit. I'm speaking, and there's two languages being spoken. The spiritual things, which it doesn't require me to say anything, that just comes out. But the thing is that our minds need to learn. Our minds need to learn. We say, that doesn't make sense because that is something natural. Our mind is something natural. Yes, but your spirit does not exist here by itself. It is inside of that vessel. And guess what? It is passing through the processor, which is your mind. And if your mind is not right, if your mind cannot handle it, if your mind cannot understand, your spirit will never bear the fruits in the way that it is supposed to bear its fruit. That's just the way that it's going to work. So once again, I'm not here to teach your spirit. I'm here to teach your mind, to understand your spirit, so that you could better understand who you are and the fruits that you are supposed to bear, that are already in there. It's going to happen if your mind allows it to be manifested. The thing is that we oftentimes do not. Look, I believe that I was pre-programmed, in pre-existence. I was always intended to be a musician. Always. It was in me. At some point, my parents saw, this guy likes music. And it's more than him just liking to listen to it. He enjoys playing it, and they must have seen something. Maybe my father was the one to notice it more, because in his family there was a musician. His grandfather was. To the best of my knowledge, on my mother's side, there wasn't. And so maybe she wouldn't have noticed it, what it means to be a musician. But on my dad's side, there was a musician. My great-grandfather, I guess we could say, he played the flute. And so, regardless of how it happened, they noticed that there was something there. And what they could have done is just said, let's just buy him something. Let's just buy him some instrument. And either way, you know what? The talent is naturally in him. He will teach himself. It will develop on its own. Either way, it's predetermined, right? It's predetermined for him to be a musician. So let's just give him that. No. They put me with a teacher. And somebody taught my mind to understand what was already in my spirit, which was what? To be a musician. But were it not for a teacher, my mind may have never learned how to extract that talent. that fruit maybe never would have been manifested. And if it would have, maybe it wouldn't have been as great or as plentiful as it came to be due to the fact that I did have teachers. And so look at it also this way, because oftentimes us as parents, we're pretty proud, and we want to say that we contain everything that our kids need. But my parents couldn't have taught me music. They themselves, we could say, are not naturally musicians. But what did they say? Without being prideful, they said, you know what, we can't develop this which is in him, so we're going to put him with a teacher that can. And so that was a huge blessing in my life. Because what if they would have said, either way is predetermined in maybe some sort of, traditional mindset, they would have just said, hey, it has to just happen on its own. No, they put me with teachers, and those teachers taught me, multiple teachers, not just one. And though I learned a lot and I eventually developed a lot of things on my own, but I'm not going to stand here and say that I never had somebody that taught me. I did. I had people that taught me music. I had people that taught me about music production. I had people that taught me a lot of different things. And so my spirit ended up producing what it was always intended to produce. I became a musician. But what if I never would have had a teacher? What if nobody would have ever shown me what it meant to be a musician? What it meant to practice? What it meant to be dedicated? A lot of those things we can say, oh, but that was probably already in you. Yeah, but I needed to be taught. I didn't know music. I knew that something was coming natural to me and that I enjoyed it, but I didn't know it. I needed to be taught. I needed to be taught. And so that's something that, like I said, we need to, in a way, break some of those traditions. Because oftentimes we say, hey, this is something that's predetermined anyways. He is going to be who he's going to be anyway, so why do we need to put him underneath some teacher? Right? Why? I mean, maybe in that case I had teachers that were part of the ministry that we were at the time, and the classes were free. Right? So I went there and I spent a lot of time. I'll be quite honest. When we were at church in San Francisco, I spent more time underneath my teachers and being with them than I did my own parents. I spent more time with them. I spent more time with other musicians, other people that could teach me than I did my own parents when we were there at that church. While we were there, it could have been a couple of hours. My parents would drop me off. Okay, it's time to practice. Sometimes the practice started like at 12. I was there for a few hours for the practice. And then we would go out to eat, and then we would spend a few more hours just hanging out together and then get ready for the service. I wouldn't get picked up. Okay, come back home now. No, I spent more time with my teachers than I did my own parents during those years. When we were at the church, I'm not talking about every single day, but nonetheless, I spent a lot of time with teachers. And of course, my spirit is going to produce the things that it was always intended to produce, because my parents put me underneath teachers that would teach me how to bear those fruits, I guess we could say, all sorts of different things, right? And so I want to go once again a little bit deeper into this, because here's an example that's going to, I think, make things a lot more clear for everybody. And let me read this to you. In the book of John, chapter 1, it says this in verse 1, in the beginning was the Word. The Word is who? We're going to say Jesus. No, that is not Jesus. That is Christ. The Word is Christ. Amen? And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Christ was with God in the beginning. The Word, once again, this is in verse 14 now, the Word, Christ, it says, became flesh. Who is the flesh? Jesus. Jesus, the man that was born, is the flesh. Christ is the Word. That spirit that existed before Jesus, the man, ever did. Before Jesus, the man, that flesh ever existed, before that baby was ever born, the Christ existed well before that time. And you and I took the same path into becoming what we are right now. Into Gabby being Gabby. Into Julissa being Julissa. Edwin being Edwin. Each one of us, the flesh, yes, came into existence, but your spirit took that same path, the same journey, existed before the flesh. I hope that makes it clear, right? Now, I want to say this. When Jesus was born, is that day one for Christ? Was Christ immature? Was Christ molded? Was the Spirit in him, the Christ in him, transformed? No. The Christ in him always was going to bear the fruit that it was intended to produce. It was always going to be the Christ. And hence, Jesus Christ. right? Hence, Jesus Christ. The Word, Christ, became flesh, Jesus. Jesus Christ. You took the same path. Your spirit pre-existed, and it comes predetermined to bear a certain type of fruit, or a variety. In this case, we're not exactly like an apple seed that we just produce one single thing, but nonetheless, there are things that we are supposed to produce. In the book of Luke, chapter 2, verse 46, it says, after 3 days, this is when the parents of Jesus, right, Joseph and Mary, the family went over, and then they lost track of him. They couldn't find him. And this is what it says. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts. And if this doesn't make it crystal clear, I don't know what will, right? After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. After 3 days, they found him sitting in the temple courts, listening to the teachers and asking them questions. You may say, why would Jesus Christ, need to be sitting listening to some other teachers? What could they possibly teach the Christ? What could they possibly teach the one and only Jesus Christ? Guess what? When Jesus was born, he did not know that he was the Christ. That baby did not know who he was. His mind did not understand his spirit. His mind was new. His body was new. Both were undeveloped. And he himself needed to sit and listen to teachers, ask them questions. He wasn't in there at 12 years old already telling them, you can't teach me anything. Don't you know who I am? I'm the Christ. I should be teaching you guys. But guess what? He became a student and he learned. He asked questions. And who was being taught? The Christ in him or his mind? His mind. His mind was undeveloped, and so this was part of the process. His mind needed to understand his spirit. My goodness, like I said, this could change your life if you wanted to. If you don't want it to, then go ahead. No worries. It's not my problem. It's not my problem. But when I read this, I was like, sitting among the teachers. A lot of us want to bypass the teacher and just say, hey, this is what I'm predetermined to do anyway, so regardless of whether I have a teacher or not, it doesn't matter. I'm going to be who I'm going to be either way. Yeah, but you might be a little crooked. You might still bear those fruits, but you know what? You might not bear the same amount that you were supposed to. You might still, bear the fruits that you were intended to produce, but maybe they're not healthy to consume. Maybe you'll produce it, but you can't share it with anybody because it's not going to be healthy for them. So if you don't want teachers, do whatever you want to do. But you need to develop your mind. You need to teach your mind to understand your spirit. And the best way to do it is to submit to a teacher. Submit to a teacher. For so long, the church has used predestination as a lazy excuse not to teach. For many years, the church, and I'm not just talking about this, I'm talking about the church in general, has used predestination as a lazy excuse to not teach. Oh, well, this kid is predestined anyways. What do I got to teach him? Eventually, his path will be straightened out. Eventually, he's going to go in the right direction. Eventually, because we say, I have the revelation. I know who this kid is. I know what he's supposed to be. And so why would I need to teach him anything? He's going to become who he's going to be anyways, right? Wrong. And guess what? You're responsible for that vessel, that spirit, not producing the fruit that it was predetermined to produce. You who are responsible for it. If I'm a parent, and if I see something in Ezra and Nemes, and if I say, I know that those kids are predetermined to be something, but guess what? Who's responsible for developing that mind? Me. And Iris. Their parents. Right? The people that God has entrusted to properly develop, not their spirit, their mind and their body. And more than anything, the mind, because the mind is going to control everything else. But who's responsible? Me and Iris. We're the parents. We're the ones that are responsible for that. Amen? So like I said, what if my parents would have just said, Oliver's going to eventually become a musician anyway, so let's just buy him some keyboard and let him learn on his own. They put me underneath a teacher. They put me underneath somebody. And I have to squash my pride as a father. And if I see something in my son whether it be Ezra or Nehemiah, he said, if I see something in one of them, and if I say, I can't teach him that, I know that he has something that needs to come out, that needs to flourish, a fruit that he will one day bear. And if I want it to properly be manifested, and if I know that I'm not capable of developing it in the right way, God help me find the right teacher for them. God help me find the right teacher for them. Because if there's something that I cannot allow, or that I cannot teach, that mind, then please put somebody in my path coming. I need that mind to be developed so that that child understands his spirit. So that when the day comes, when that child becomes a boy, when that boy becomes a man, and it becomes time for him to support the things that the spirit needs to manifest, that he is capable. That he has sufficient strength, not physically, mentally, to understand what he is called to do, what he was always predetermined to be. But if I am a bad parent, and if I just say, if I'm just lazy and I just say, I'm not going to put him under any teacher, I'm just going to let him watch TV. I'm just going to let him play on the iPad all the time. Why do I need to read books to them? They're just going to be who they're going to be anyways, right? I'm a terrible parent if I do that. Terrible parent. Terrible, terrible parent if I do that. It would be foolish of me to do that. Foolish of me. A few weeks ago, Ezra School had a seminar. It's called Kid Power. And a lady essentially came out, and this was only parents, a seminar only for parents. Essentially, we're teaching parents how to handle life events that children are going to eventually experience, right? Whether it be bullying, whether it be strangers, all sorts of different things. And they teach parents how to teach their kids. And I'm going to tell you this, I didn't even know what it was. Iris was just like, let's go. I was like, okay, whatever, let's just go. Yeah, I was like, it sounded like Kid Power. I thought I had to take the kids, but no. It was to empower the parents to empower the kids, right? And this message did not come from that. This is just an example. But there, I learned so many things, and I feel like I came out of there a better parent. I came out of there a better father. You say, how are you going to come out of there a better father? Back in the days, people would say, what? You need to go take a class to be a mom or to be a dad? Back in the day, just go ask your grandma. Go ask your grandma. Go ask some of the older ladies. Ask them how they did it. Right? That was the old way of thinking, right? Oh, so what did you do with this? Oh, you know what I did? It's because I made this special drink with these spices and herbs and everything like that, and that made my baby feel a lot better. Right? Not really understanding what the problem was. You're just like, that's what they did back then. So, hey, if it worked for them, why wouldn't it work for me? Well, back in the days, you know what? They used to hit their kids quite often, right? Should we continue to hit our kids? Because that's the way that it worked in my grandparents and great-grandparents' era. Is that the way that I should do it then? Should I hit my kids, or is it better to understand how to speak to a child? Is it better to understand the psychological aspect of a 2-year-old? Wow. Oliver, you're saying psychological. That doesn't belong in church. The word psychological doesn't belong in church. That's wrong. That's from the devil. The word psychological? No. We need to speak to the spirit of the child. The spirit of the child is predetermined. The spirit of the child, that child is going to produce the fruits that it's intended to produce. I can't make a child that's not supposed to be a musician into a musician if he wasn't predetermined to be a musician. I don't care what teacher you put any child under. If they're not intended to be a musician, they will not be a musician. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. But guess what? I want to be the best father that I can be. And if that means that I'm going to attend a seminar, then I'm going to attend a seminar. Because it would be wrong of me, and once again, foolish of me to assume that I am the best possible father that I can be right now, today. I'm the best I could possibly be. It is not. Because you know what? The love that I have for those kids is not enough. It is not enough. Love is not enough. I'm going to end with this example. And forgive me, Itzel, for using you as an example. But look, Itzel has always said that she loves kids of a certain age, babies, right? She loves babies. She loves holding them. I remember when Ezra was little, she was still in high school. She loved holding them, all sorts of different things. So much, though, that she decided to take it as a major in school. But tell me this. When Itzel is in class, who is the teacher speaking to? Her spirit or her mind? Her mind. Her spirit, she already has the love for kids. It's there already, right? I could probably, nothing we could do could ever remove her joy of being with kids, of children, infants, toddlers, whatever it may be, right? But guess what? They're not going to let you open up a daycare on your spiritual gift alone. They're not going to let you open up a daycare because she says, you know what, I've loved kids since I was a little kid, myself. You know, ever since I was like 4 or 5 years old, I always loved babies. You know, I always loved them. She went to school. Her mind now is able to better understand what was always in her spirit to begin with. So she is going to school, and guess what? Here's the scary word again. She's understanding the psychological aspect of dealing with kids. Because love is not enough. We may say, I love to preach. Does that mean you don't need to read the Bible? Does that mean that you don't need to listen, that you don't need to submit to an authority? Oh, but I love to preach. Guess what? I love to preach too. But I love sitting there and being a student and listening to my teacher, who is my pastor. I love it because I'm learning. Because guess what? Being a pastor is more than just being able to preach. What if you're a good preacher, but you have no idea how to manage the financial responsibilities of being a pastor? Or handling the psychological aspect of the congregation? Because you're going to have to deal with people that come from maybe, you know, all sorts of different backgrounds. Some were poor, some were well off, some were educated, some were not. Guess what? The spirit is already predetermined, but you have to also deal with that person's mindset. And if you think that it's all about preaching, then you're gonna get hit with the reality check really soon, really quick. That first congregation, that first service that you have where you're officially that pastor, and if you think that it's all about just preaching, it's gonna be really hard moving forward. Because it is about more than that. Our own pastor oftentimes says, look, from one person, I learned how to preach. And from this other pastor, who was also my teacher, I learned how to administer. Two different things. It is not the same. You would think, well, it should be the same. If you're called to be a pastor, you're called to be a pastor, right? It's not the same thing. Your spirit may be predetermined to do that. But your mind, if it can't understand your spirit, you're going to suffer. You're going to suffer. And so, in this word, what I want us to all understand is that it is important for us to learn. It is important for us to learn. And we say, oh yeah, but I need that spiritual nourishment, of course. But guess what? Your mind is mature. Your spirit is mature. Your mind is what needs to be developed. Your mind is what needs to be reprogrammed, recoded, overwrite those old laws that made you not be able to produce the fruits that you're intended to produce. And like I said, this could change your life. This could change your life if you open your mind. And if you say, you know what? Maybe I have been focusing so much on the spiritual aspect. Just thinking about my spirit, worrying about my spirit. The spirit, those things take care of itself because God already sent it with a purpose. Worry about renewing your mind. Nobody's ever going to put a new spirit in that vessel. That spirit that is inside of that vessel is going to be there until that flesh, that body, is no longer in existence. The spirit is always going to be there. The Father of all spirits will reclaim what is His. It pre-existed your body. So what we need to do is not be afraid of something like, let's say, oh, I'm going to learn. I'm not saying we need to become theologians. I hope nobody misunderstands what I'm saying. I'm not saying we need to study God or study being a pastor or study, being a father, just so we can have the academic knowledge. No, that would be a misinterpretation of what I'm trying to say. Because like I said, you can't pull something out of you that isn't there. You just can't. It has to exist in there already. All you're doing is nourishing it. You're developing that tree that will one day hold the fruit that your spirit was always intended to produce. Amen? Let's stand on our feet.